wondered who makes and designs the beautiful costumes actors wear on stage and TV, you'll meet an Emmy-nominated costume designer this evening. And she grew up in neighboring Frenchtown. Welcome and thank you for attending tonight's program, which is sponsored by the Holland Township Public Library. My name is Jan Rauer, and I'm the program's chair on the Board of Trustees at the library. And I have the honor of chatting with Kristin Fiebig Isola tonight. We invited Kristin as part of the New Jersey Makers Day, which celebrates innovators and people who inspire us. And a good example is our guest this evening. Kristin graduated from Del Valle and went on to Syracuse University, where she earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and then on to Yale University, where she earned a Master's in Fine Arts in theatrical design. Her work ranges from new plays and music.
That was weird that you could do it the other way.
A few of her recent projects include Pose, the Deuce, and Fosse Verdon, for which she received an Emmy nomination in 2019. She still loves to work in theater and recently designed a new musical at MCC Theater titled The Wrong Man. Currently living in New York City with her husband, who is an actor and I guess a professor also, and her son. We welcome Kristin Fiebig Isola. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you.
Let's start with your life in Frenchtown. What was it like growing up in Frenchtown? Tell us about your childhood and what were your interests?
Well, I loved growing up in Frenchtown. It was just a fantastic community to grow up in. My mom grew up in Frenchtown. My grandfather was actually a cartoonist and moved from New York City with my mom when she was about 4. So he lived down the street, and once a week we'd have Grandpa Day, where my brother, who's 2 years older than me, we would alternate who gets to go to Grandpa's house. And there's really where my interest in art began. I mean, he really was doing these advanced art classes with us when we were like 4 years old or so. Actually, in college, I remember being in a 2D design class and I was like, I've done this before. And they were like, you did? You have? I was like, yeah, I think when I was 5, I did this kind of like lithographing work with my grandfather.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how I always was involved with some like painting or drawing. And my mom is an amazing sewer. She made costumes for this like barbershop choir that she sang with. And I remember being about 4 years old and with the glue, tacky glue, putting rhinestones on necklaces and on costumes and stuff. And so from the beginning, I was always making something. She taught me to embroider, to knit. She recently taught me to quilt. So I've always been making things my whole life, which is one of my greatest fun hobbies that I love. And I was able to kind of parlay it into a career, which I feel very fortunate to have been able to do. So I was always making something with my mom. She made my clothes. I would go to the store, I'd pick out the pattern and the fabric, and she would make it for me. It was like having my personal seamstress with me all the time. And then I started taking ballet classes when I was about 4 years old at the Roger Atkinson studio with Miss Elaine, which was in Frenchtown. And I did that until I was 18. I did that till my senior year of high school. And with that, I started to notice as I got a little older that I was more excited for the day that we got our costumes for the recital than I was, which was the best day. Exactly, Matheson knows. I started to notice I was paying more attention to what the costume was going to be than perhaps the dance steps. So that started my like inkling of like, what is this that I'm really interested in, you know? And then we would do these shows. They were more than just a recital, and the dance teacher would give me little extra parts, and then she let me design my own costumes, and then my mom would make them for me.
Wow.
So it all kind of was formulating ever since I was a kid, even though I didn't know that being a costume designer was a career. I had no idea really. So.
Yeah, I understand your parents owned a few businesses in Frenchtown, and one of them was a fabric store.
Yep.
Did you work in the store, or did you learn about fabrics and what they can do in that when you were a child?
Oh yeah, we always were helping out, and I was probably my mom's best and worst customer because I loved everything but didn't pay for anything. So I had quite the embroidery floss collection. I made a lot of friendship bracelets from there. Yeah, we were always helping out with our parents' businesses, and it was always a team effort. So, and I loved playing with it all too. It was so great. So anything I wanted to make, any interest that I had, my parents were always there supporting it.
So we learned that your grandfather really promoted your interest in sketching and drawing and art in that direction. Did you learn to sew? What age did you learn to sew?
I probably started using a sewing machine when I was about 7 or 8, I think. But I was always sewing with like hand sewing or embroidery or, all of that, like around 4 or 5,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Okay. Do you still
So,
do that? Do you
yeah.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
you mentioned that your mom has taught you to crochet. And
Yeah, I quilt and knit, embroider. I have quite the stash tucked away in all the different closets here. And it's been great, like for my career, especially starting out in theater, you have to make a lot on your own. And so I've always had a knack for it and kind of willing to jump into anything, to like from millinery work to, craft work and all of it. So, but yeah, I'm always sewing or always making something. I'm not able to watch a TV show without doing something. So,
do you think your experience with Roger Atkinson, do you think that helped you develop how to learn about how fabric moves and what will be good for a certain dance or for a certain play? Do you think that may have influenced you at all?
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we did more than, I studied ballet, jazz, and tap there. So we did classical ballets and we did musicals as well. And so I was kind of just taking it all in at the same time and not really aware that I was taking it all in. I know how like the different tutus move and like the different weights of the nets and how, a fabric can move with the body and how that looks in the space against the set and with the lighting. Like my mom was very generous and would let me sit and watch like the whole dress rehearsal, because the little kids were always in the beginning. And I was like, Mom, we have to sit and watch the whole thing. And so I would just sit in the front row, just like loving every minute of it because I started when I was 4, 5, something like that. So, yeah.
And when you went to Del Val, what courses influenced you? Did you take any art or drawing classes in high school?
Yeah, I always took as many art classes as I could. We even had a jewelry making class, which was so much fun doing the metal work. Unfortunately, there wasn't any clothing construction courses available anymore. They had actually just stopped that program, but I had my mom, so it was fine. I was always still making things. But yeah, I always took drawing, painting, as many classes as I could. And then I was also involved in the musicals as well every year. I didn't do the plays as much. I always thought I was more like, I always was a dancer in the musicals. I kind of liked that more than the straight plays. And yeah, and then I did sports as well. But I wish I'd kind of kept up more with the music. Like I stopped playing an instrument. I played an instrument in elementary school, but I wish I kept up with it in high school. But there was a point where my mom said, you can't do everything. You have to do your homework and go to sleep at some point. Because at high school, I'd have cross country or musical practice or track practice. And then every week I had 10 hours of dance after I was done with the sports. And I was an honor roll student and honors classes. And if I had that energy now, it would be amazing. The energy of a 16-year-old is incredible. I really wish I still had that.
Did you make any costumes while you were in high school?
Yeah, by the end, I would actually get to design some of our costumes for the dancers. Like we did cabaret my senior year, and the music director let me design the Kit Kat Club Girl costumes, and my mom made them for us.
Wow.
So again, my seamstress on hand. And I helped, but she was, I didn't quite know well enough to sew then, but.
So when did you know in high school, junior year, senior year, that you knew, when did you know you wanted to go on for a professional BFA and an MFA in theatrical design?
I actually didn't know. I really didn't even know then that you could do this. I know that sounds so silly, but I'm old and it was really pre-internet. So it was like we didn't have access to like knowing these things. It sounds so silly to say that, but I don't know, like I just didn't put it together, even though I would come to New York all the time and see shows. I just didn't connect it. So I just knew senior year that it was like, I wanted to do something with clothing and something, I wanted to keep my interest of theater going. So when we were looking at schools, it came up for Syracuse that they did have a BFA program, but since I wasn't completely certain about it, it felt like a big commitment. But they had a fashion design program, which was a BS degree. So the thought was like, well, why don't I try that out? And then I would still be getting more of a liberal arts degree. And then if, say, it wasn't working out, I could switch to something else. And also it was such a big university that if I found another program that was interesting to me, it would be easy to transfer. And, it felt like I had a lot of options there. So I wanted to give myself those choices because I was 18. I really wasn't certain. And so I started in fashion and I liked it, but then it kind of got to this point where it was, they would say, design a collection of 6 to 8 dresses. And I was always raising my hand being like, about what? Like from what? What is the story that we're trying to tell? And they were like, you make it up. And I just kind of, by the end of the year, was just feeling, I need more than that. I need more of a collaboration. I need people to talk to, and what's the story and what's kind of the basis. And I realized, I don't really care about the newest shirt each season. I'm not, that's not my focus. And I was kind of missing the history a little bit. Even though I didn't know how to really articulate that all yet, it just kind of was like, I don't know if this is it. So I then just walked down to the theater program and met with the costume design professor, and I showed her the fashion sketches that I had been doing through the year. And she was like, yeah, come on in. And it was a very small program. There was, I think there was only 10 of us total. And we studied set design, lighting design, and costume design. So I think there was only 3 costume designers, like 4 set designers, and maybe 2 lighting designers. But yeah, and then it was kind of once I took that first class, it was like, oh, okay, like this is bringing everything that I'm loving. Like I love history, I love art, I love theater. What is this world that I fell upon? I was like, this, I don't have to be on stage. That's not going to be for me. And yeah, it was like I kind of found home, sort of, not to be cheesy, but I was like, this is it. I've really found what I want. And then I loved it. And I lucked out that Syracuse has an amazing program. I kind of didn't really do my research completely. I just really liked the university as a whole. And then I kind of lucked out that it's an amazing theater program at the same time. Like we have in the same building is the university's drama department, and there's a regional theater. And so, but there's no graduate program. So all of your productions are built by a professional costume shop. So you're 19 years old and you're treated like a professional immediately. Like you have to find the fabrics. They walk you, they really don't hold your hand. They're just kind of like, here you go. here's your show. And it's the same for the lighting designers, set designers, and the costume designers. And then you get opportunities to assist the professional designers as well who are working for the Syracuse Stage Theater. And I was also fortunate to do work study where I worked in the costume shop. So I even got to work professionally and learned even more about sewing than my mom had taught me. So it was great.
Since you applied to Syracuse for a BS, then you didn't submit a portfolio for them to review. If you had applied for the BFA, you would have submitted a portfolio. Is that correct?
I did submit a portfolio, but it wasn't as rigorous, I suppose, of a portfolio review. I think they just wanted to see kind of what I could do already. It was a little more kind of open-ended than I had friends who were in, you know, getting an art degree. That was much more intensive of a portfolio review.
Did you do a study abroad experience?
I ended up not doing that because I always had a show every semester that I was designing. The university did have a great program in London where you would study at the Globe, but it was more focused for the actors than it was for the designers. So I kind of felt like I had enough going on at the university. And then a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me found out, I don't think this program exists anymore, but it had originally started as a student exchange program, but you could go and live in London after you had been a student. You had like 1 year to qualify for it. So what I ended up doing after I graduated, I went and lived in London and worked in a pub, and I worked on a film for a bit, and I catered, and was just kind of 22 years old and living in London and enjoying it and not having the pressures of school on top of it. So it actually felt much more immersive because I wasn't a part of a program. I just went with a friend, and it was great. I actually met a lot of people from various countries, and so it was very fun.
So then you went on to Yale, and can you describe that experience? That had to be more intensive as far as the collaboration in all aspects of the major.
I did. I actually waited to go back to school. I actually worked at McCarter Theater in Princeton for 3 years. I was the first hand in the costume shop, which is the position where the draper makes the patterns and I cut out the patterns and help stitch them together. It's kind of an assembly line system. So I did that for 3 years because I wasn't completely sure about grad school. It felt like it's such an intense program, and I really wanted to go to either Yale or NYU. And I felt like I needed more work experience before I went back to school. So I did that for 3 years, and it was great. I met a lot of really great people, and I worked with some really top designers as well. And I even got to design a show for them before I went, just a smaller show for them. But they were really great about seeing me as a designer and kind of help fostering that.
Should we move on to the process?
Oh, sure.
Okay, let's see if I can bring up your slides and you can walk us through it.
Sure.
Okay. Can you see the first screen? First slide?
No, I can't. Let's see.
Okay, hold on a second. How about now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Okay. All right.
Hello?
Is this where you want to start with this slide, or?
Sure. You know, we can start with the costume sketch just so we can see what it's going to look like. It's the next slide.
Okay.
So this is a production that I did at Yale Rep. In your third year of grad school, you get to design a production for the regional theater. I chose to show just kind of like this as a process because period shows are a little bit of a different process than a contemporary show. So this show took place, it was set in 1690. It's called A Doctor in Spite of Himself, and it's a commedia show. But we didn't have them wear, traditionally they would wear leather masks. We only had them wear them in one part of the show. But this is the character of Lucinda. And we wanted to kind of take the 1690s and then we kind of infused it with 20th century looks. So some of the other characters are taken off of Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers. And this was the daughter who was kind of really angry because her father wouldn't let her marry the guy that she wanted to. So we kind of took this like really sulky goth girl look, mixed it with it. So here's the costume sketch. And then the next slide is some contemporary research that I looked at. And then the next one is the 5 is the 1690s. Oh,
That one?
oh, that's the production photo.
Okay.
Sorry, the period research isn't there. It's okay. But so the general process of costume design is that I have a script, I read through it, I then do research on the period, whether it be today, 1690s, 1970s, you know, whatever it is. And I start to pull research together of like what I feel it fits each character. And then I meet with the director, we talk through that, and then I start to put together some costume sketches, which is the one you saw. And then once that gets kind of all settled with the director, the first slide is I then start to put together fabric swatches. Okay. And so what I do is I go to all the fabric stores in New York. Sometimes we find things online, but it's not as good as just seeing the fabric in person. And what we do is we start to get little samples of fabrics, and you go to the stores and they let you take them for free. And then you go through all of the fabrics and you kind of like, all right, this is what I'm liking. This is where I'm kind of heading towards this. And I meet with the director again, and the costume shop that's building my costumes, we figure out which things we can make, which things we might have to pull from stock or shop, or depending on what the needs are, what your budget is. That's always the big deciding factor. And then I select the fabrics. They get, depending on the director of how involved they want to do, I run them by them. And so this shows the fabrics that were selected. And so I create a little swatch card. And then if you want to go down to like the production photo, you can see kind of the final result. And then the costume shop puts it together, and then we have fittings with the actors. And I really like to involve the actors' thoughts, you know, about accessories and talk to them about what their needs are. This was a really ridiculous, physically crazy show. They were running all over the place. There was tons of costume changes. And so, you know, we talk about all of that with the actors, and I work with them, and we have a first fitting where we kind of, if it's a build show, it's like they do a mock-up, which they take muslin, which is a really cheap fabric. It's just beige, it's not dyed. And they put the dress or whatever the garment is together in that. So then you can easily make changes, make adjustments, what you need before. And like sometimes you have to kind of like start all over or something like that, but you don't waste the fabric that you're going to be making the costume out of, because sometimes it gets very expensive. And so then they make the corrections to the patterns, and then we have a second fitting, and that's when we really put everything together. We're like, we have all the shoes and we have all the accessories, and then we're kind of getting a more complete look. And so that last slide is when we have the finished garment. That's the production photo.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I had a wig designer. So I tell them what I want the wigs to look like, and then they work with me and they build it, and they can help me design the makeup as well. But yeah, we have lots of stuff made. I don't think I had any shoes made for this show, but yeah. So that's the
Amazing
process for
process.
more of a period show. And then for a contemporary show, I again read the script, do research, talk with the director, and then it's a lot of shopping. And then we have fittings where we just try on a lot of different things. And actors are much more vocal with a contemporary show because it's contemporary clothes and there's more of a connection. Whereas sometimes with, especially the earlier periods, like 1690s or 1800s, it's a little more of like, they kind of defer to you. They're like, you know, this period a little bit better. But with a contemporary show, it's again, fittings, multiple fittings. We all tailor things. Sometimes we make things too, if we need something very specific, say the script says something very specific. But yeah, we take a lot of fitting photos. And when you're in the theater, you have a lot of options because things change during rehearsal. You see it under the lights for the first time.
Mhm.
So that's kind of, it's very similar. But with period shows, you tend to build more because it tends to be more specific for what the needs of the play are.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. How long did this take you to design this costume?
I think I had about a month for the design process. Usually have a few weeks. And then in theater, you typically have 3 to 4 weeks of rehearsal. So you have that time, just like the first time you meet the actor and you get their measurements, and that's when the drapers can start building the costumes. And then there's a week called a technical rehearsal, which is the first time that you're all in the space. It's when you see the sets, costumes, and lights together, and you kind of just do a walkthrough of the show.
Mhm.
It's like you have about 2 12-hour days, and then you have about 10-hour days for that week. And that's the time to really make any adjustments and changes. And then they have a preview process, which is when you first start inviting an audience.
Mhm.
And you can still make adjustments up until the opening night.
Do you?
And
will
for
you
TV,
do-
TV is a bit different timeline. You have usually 7 to 8 weeks to prep before you start filming. So you have design, builds, fittings, all within those 7 to 8 weeks. And then once you start filming, you're just kind of working through each episode as you get the scripts. You don't really get the scripts too far in advance. So it's a bit of a sprint for 6 months. It's pretty crazy.
What is your favorite part of the design process?
I always like the research part.
The
I really love that. I love finding the fabrics. I don't know, it's fun. I kind of love it all, to be completely honest. It's so fun to see it all come together once you've been thinking about this thing for so many weeks. And then in theater, the first time you see it all come up on stage under the lights, and it's really exciting to like see your designs come to life. And in TV, it's really fun to see it all kind of come together. It's a little bit more fragmented. It's something that is a little bit harder about TV, is that it's such a big scale. There's just so many people involved that it's not the same sense of community as you have in theater. Like in theater, you have a week in the space, everyone's together. It's just a different kind of volume too. You know, I mean, when I was working on Fosse Verdon, my job for that was designing the background. So it's a much bigger team. You have the designer, you have the first assistant, and then you have 3 other assistants. You have a shopper their whole job is just to shop the whole time. That's what I did on Pose. Background designer designs the costumes for every person who's on camera that doesn't speak. And so that was my job on Fosse. And like by the end of the 5 months of filming, I fit 2,000 wait, I remembered the number. It was 2,546 people.
Oh my.
I would fit 30 people, 30 to 35 people a day. I'd have, and they would just come in and I would just know, oh, you're a theater goer in 1950 at the opening of Damn Yankees. And I was like, okay, I think you look like a 50-year-old woman who has a lot of money and is excited to be here with her husband. So let's do something a little more flashy. You know, it was just like, that was my job, was just to like make up stories for these people. And I just had a title for them that was just 1950s theater goer. And that would be, we'd have 200 people in a scene. So I'd have to fit all of those people. So I just had a room that had just hundreds of clothes in it. And I would just run through the racks and I'd have 20 minutes for each person. So.
My goodness. That's amazing. Really.
It was, you know, it was interesting doing the background fittings because it was kind of like designing in its most like simplest form. It was like a person walked in, we measured them, I took the card, and then I ran through the racks and I pulled as many things that I think would fit them because everything's organized by size. And then we're like, try these things on, and then we take a picture, and they're like, try this other outfit on, and take a picture, and then I'd send them on their way. And then the assistant at the end of the day would kind of go through all the photos with me and be like, all right, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. Because they would know what the principals would be wearing. The principals are the main actors. And I would never know, you know, if Gwen Verdon is in a green dress, I can't have anybody else in a green dress. They would sometimes give me heads up on it, but usually I was just like, okay. I'm like, what does the room look like? Great, got it. So
I'm amazed.
TV is a whole other animal. I'm excited. I haven't done a movie yet, so I'm hoping my next project can maybe be do a movie. It's like slower pace. Like on Pose, we wouldn't get a script until 3 days before we started filming sometimes. So I was like, go, 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 just chop, whatever. It was set in 1990s, and I'd just be like digging through all the thrift stores like a crazy person.
Wow. What is your dream job? What would you, is there a play or a TV show or that you just loved, or a certain period of time that you would love to design for?
I do like to do the older periods. Like I haven't done the 18th century in a really long time. Like I love that movie Marie Antoinette, that is a Sofia Coppola movie from many moons ago. I love like when they do a straight period show, but then they make it, you know, relevant to a contemporary audience. I think that's really fun. I don't know. What I love about my job is that I'm freelance, so I go from project to project. And so every project is completely different. And I love the change in that. And yet the job itself like has the same parameters of research, understanding a character, and collaborating with the actors and the directors. And I like being able to switch back and forth between theater and TV and film. I mean, that's what's so great about New York is now there's so much more TV and film here that you can go back and forth between theater. Because in LA, it's pretty separate. There's just not as much theater, and it's kind of different worlds in a way. So, because a lot of this jobs are really from recommendations. So once you kind of know more people in TV and film, that's kind of the world you get looped into. So, but I tend to do more period shows. So when I did this musical, The Wrong Man at MCC, it was funny. I hadn't done a theater show in about 2 years, and I hadn't done a contemporary show that I really just spent one day just walking around Bloomingdale's being like, what do people wear today? I have no idea. Like, what's in style? I don't like, I've been stuck in the 70s for so long. Like, what is going on? But I like the change all the time. That's something that is really exciting. So there isn't really a specific thing that I would dream to do. I'm happy to be able to do what I do, which is really great.
What would you say to young students who have something like this in mind, who want to be a costume designer? What path should they take as far as maybe a high school student?
I
Any
think
courses or experiences that really you look back and say, wow, that really was a turning point for me, or that set me on the right path?
the great thing about this job is that it's, theater and TV, it's stories about people. And that's what I really love about it. And so when I was in college, I tried to take as many different classes of history, I took psychology, I took human sexuality, I took anthropology. I really tried to broaden my experiences as much as I could, because you're about telling the stories of people, and it's like you have to understand people in order to be able to do this. It's not about clothes 100%. It's about telling the story of these people through the clothes. Like if you love fashion, and then like that's definitely where you should go, and or going more into contemporary TV shows. But with that, it's like you have to understand like why people wear the clothes that they do, and how we present ourselves like informs so much about who we are, where we're from. And I love being able to help share and tell those stories of people. And I love being able to take all the different courses that I did. And I also loved getting the work experience. I had a lot of friends at Yale who had no idea how to sew, and I was so confused. I was like, how can you be a costume designer and not know how to sew? I mean, how are we able to this is the tools of our trade. So it's really about like getting as much experience as you can in all the different facets of it. And I really liked Syracuse and Yale's program. I mean, Syracuse was modeled off of the Yale program, where you learn set, lights, and costumes, because you're not designing in this vacuum of like just clothes. That's all I think about. It's the whole world, and how do you combine all of those elements together to tell the story. So my advice is really just, gain as much work experience as you can. Like start working as a PA if you want to do that, or work as an intern. And there's all these summer theaters that you can work at. Oh, like summer stock is kind of crazy, but it's a lot of fun, and you gain a lot of experience too. And sometimes, I mean, I loved getting my BFA, but sometimes I'm like, like maybe an English degree or a history degree would have been great too, to kind of get more of that background, and then you can specialize later on through grad school or just work experience. The hardest part about this job is that there's no straight trajectory of, I did these steps and now I'm working on Broadway. Like everyone comes at it from such different angles, and so many people don't go to school for it, and you learn so much on every single job that it's not even necessary. Like you really could, be a chemical engineer and they'll be like, you know what, I really love costume design. Like I'm going to explore that. And it's just through the experience, you can learn so much, because every project is different and you learn so. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years now, which is crazy. And I learned so much all the time. I still feel like every time I start a job, I'm like, oh my God, I have so much to learn. But yeah, it's really just about like being open to learning, and working with other people is really the best part about it.
How about questions from the audience? Anybody want to ask a question? Just unmute yourself. And do I need to do that? Any?
How do you get jobs? Do you have an agent, or are you just on different producers' lists?
I don't have an agent right now, but a lot of designers do who are much further along in their career. I'm still doing a lot of assisting right now, so I don't feel like I need an agent. It's really like people call you, and pass your name along to other people. Like right now I'm in between projects. I just finished up working on Dickinson for a bit. And so now I'm just kind of waiting to see what's coming up next. And it's really like, you just call people and say, hey, I'm available. Like, what's going on? And a lot of times, especially in TV, you can work, you're called a day player, where you're just hired on for a short amount of time. You're not there for the whole season. But then you can be hired. Like I was hired on Pose, and on Fosse, I was there for the whole season. So yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 sometimes of you have to know people, but it's quick once you start to get to know people. And there's times where you're like, oh my God, we got to hire a shopper. Who do you know? And you just call 15 people until somebody pops up. And then you're like, great, let's work together. So it's kind of a crazy thing. And it's the same for theater. You get hired per project too.
Good question, thanks. Anybody else? Matheson is ready with a question. Can't hear you, Matheson.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Matheson, we can't hear you.
What about Halloween costumes? I have never done anything with Halloween costumes. I mean, I make my sons, but this year, what was he this year? What was he, Mom, what was he this year? Oh, it was Darth Vader. It was Darth Vader. And he was Iron Spider-Man last year. It's like the whole gamut of superheroes. No, I haven't really done anything for that. I'm terrible at dressing up myself. It's awful. It's like I do costumes all day long. I'm like, oh God, like Halloween.
Do you make any of your own clothes?
Not so much, which is terrible. I always think I'm going to. I buy a lot of fabric with the intention of doing that, but I've been making more quilts lately.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Anybody have questions? This has been wonderful, Kristin. We can't thank you enough for taking your time to do this and explain your wonderful career. Just
I have a question.
okay, great.
Hi, thank you for taking your time. So you said you're 20 years in and you're assistant. Where do you see yourself in maybe 5 to 10 years from now in this, or how do you see this costume designing field changing?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out right now. You can be an assistant. Like there are people on Broadway who are career assistants. They just do that their whole life. And I've gotten close to doing more design work on my own. That's gotten closer to Broadway. But in TV as well, like you can be an assistant for your career. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of still, I've only been working in TV for 3 years. So I'm still very new to producers and directors in that way of being known as a designer myself. But I'm not sure yet if I feel like I'm ready to helm that ship. It's a big ship to be in charge of it all, and being an assistant is takes that pressure off a little bit. But I don't know yet. A goal that I do have is like, I'd really love to work for Saturday Night Live, or I'm also talking like maybe for like a late night talk show or something like that. Like there's a lot of different avenues to go in, and I'm kind of exploring that right now. So I can't read the whole question.
I was intrigued by the wig making. Is there such a thing as a professional wig stylist?
Oh yeah, one of my good friends, his job is he builds wigs. That's a whole other field, which is fascinating. So that's like different from makeup design too. And then there's all the special effects, prosthetics as well. That's a whole other thing that people do. My job as the costume designer is that I kind of put together the whole look, and then I work with the wig designer of how to kind of put that together. I take their feedback from them, and then they build the wigs for me. And like this show that I did for The Wrong Man, one of the actresses, we weren't planning on having wigs, but the lead actress, her hair had been damaged so much from past shows that she requested a wig. So I hired my friend to come on, and even though it was a contemporary show, you would never know that she was wearing a wig. It was that good. So sorry, I didn't miss the other question.
Have you designed costumes for professional dancers?
I haven't done dance, and I would actually really love to do that. It's again, another world. Like, I've done some opera. I assisted on La Boheme with the Washington National Opera down at the Kennedy Center. But yeah, I'd love to do dance. That's another thing. I still, when the world was normal, I would go to the ballet all the time, but looking forward to being able to go back. But yeah, that's a whole other world that I'd love to explore too. And the great thing is that you can bounce between all of the different projects. Like, my union encompasses all of the different fields, so I'm able to work in any of those fields. I just don't have a lot of connections to the dance world right now. So, but you never know. I've got plenty more time. Who is the youngest person? Sorry.
Professional.
The youngest person I've worked with?
Professional.
Professional. Yeah, I mean, I've had kids in tons of shows. Just in Dickinson last year, we had babies. So we had to design costumes for the babies. The 1860s clothing for infants. They were like 3 months old. It was so cute. It was so fun. What about as helpers or workers? I mean, as like assistants? Yeah, I mean, I usually, like, my youngest intern has been 18 when I had, I've had production assistants that are like 19 years old, or usually they're college students when I worked at like summer stock theaters. But anybody who, wants to intern, you can do it at age 15 or so. I mean, a lot of the summer stock theaters, you have to live there, so they would prefer you to be 18, I'm sure. But if you found a theater that's locally, I know that McCarter Theaters in Princeton, they have a great education program that is for acting, but I'm sure if you reached out to them, they could, if you were saying, I want to intern in the costume shop, I'm sure that they would work with you to set something up and, help you work backstage. They do Christmas Carol every year, and now the production is much more community involved. They have a whole kind of like chorus of people that is from the community. And so I know that they're always looking for community engagement. So if anyone younger wanted to work there, I'm sure that they would be happy to meet with you.
As an assistant designer, do you design just for one character then? Or what is the difference between being an assistant, or are there a number of assistants who report to the head designer?
Yeah, it varies from project to project. In theater, there's really just the designer and then the one assistant. And so as the assistant, I help the designer from the beginning. Like, I gather research for them. I'm there in every meeting with the directors. I'm there as kind of like a sounding board as they're kind of putting together the designs. And then I help put it all together. I do the shopping. I'm there for all the fittings. I'm taking all the notes. I'm coordinating all of the builds in New York. Something different about theater in New York is that each Broadway theater is just rented. They have to bring everything in. So the costume shops are not a part of each production. They are their own entity. So like Hamilton was built at like Eric Winterling's and John Christensen's and at various different shops in the city. And so what you do is like the designer puts together the designs and the assistant helps that. And then they send out the designs to the different shops. And then the shops put out bids of how much they think the designs will cost for them to make. And then the designer has to meet with the producers and then figure out, okay, that will cost us X amount of money. Great. Let's have them build this. Let's have them build that. And, you know, everything comes down to money, of course. But as the assistant, you really work with the designer. Like, I find all the fabric swatches. I do all the shopping. I'm there for all the fittings. I'm helping putting it together. And then in TV, it's just much bigger. Everyone has a specific role. And the first assistant is really the manager of all of the assistants, of putting it all together and making sure that everything's ready for the day of filming. So it's a lot of management and a lot of, like, you have to be in charge of all the budgets. Like on Dickinson, I was in charge of $1 million budget for that. Like, I had to make sure I was keeping track of everything. And it's a lot of accounting, which I didn't realize when I was signing up for this job. But, you know, it's like I'm an office manager. I'm managing a team of 10 to 15 people. It's a lot of different roles that you have to play, as well as being creative and knowing the difference between all the different fabrics and the hats and the shoes. And, you know, you wear a lot of hats.
What influences you to either accept or decline a job?
It's really about the project. Like, I really like to tell stories about people that aren't always being told. I really loved working on Pose. I really loved working on the Deuce. The Wrong Man was about a man who was wrongfully accused of murder and sent to death row. I mean, I do like to do comedies. I know it doesn't sound like I do a lot of comedies, but I like to do it all. And, you know, it varies. I mean, I would say that, like, the show Billions probably wouldn't be the best show for me. It's about a hedge fund, you know. I mean, I don't really know about that world, so. But I like to do more like characters, and I like to do shows that are different time periods too.
Great. Anybody else? There's more typing.
Thanks. I think we can hear you, Matheson, because I heard you typing.
Yes, fascinating.
Thanks.
Do you have any of your classmates with us tonight?
I don't know. I'm terrible at keeping in touch. It's what I love about the job is that it combines so many of my interests, and, you know, it's very long hours. It's 12 to 14-hour days. But I don't mind it because I feel so fortunate to get to do something that just combines so many of my interests. I feel very fortunate to have found this field. So
thank you so much for all of this, and we'll be rooting for you for the next Emmy nomination. Okay.
Thanks. I was very lucky that I got to go. It was 2 years ago, so it was before the pandemic. So it was very fun to go out to LA and go to it. So, you know, now they do it over Zoom. It's kind of anticlimactic.
I know Frenchtown is proud.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.